When you saw that battle unfold, how did you feel about that? Or did you even see yourself in that? Like,
they called him untouchable, the God MC, the lyrical messiah of hip-hop. But at 56 years old, Rakim is finally opening up about the people he couldn't stand, the ones who disrespected his legacy, crossed personal lines, or challenged him in ways that still sting decades later. For a man who rarely raised his voice, Rakim's rivalries weren't loud, they were loaded. And just when you think this list will be full of harmless competition, one name leads to a threat so real, Rakim said he'd knock the man the f*** out.
Church, I love you, man, but I will knock you the f***.
This is more than just rap beef. It's about legacy, betrayal, silence, and pride. These are the 5 artists Rakim hated the most, and the shocking stories behind each fallout. Let's start with the man Rakim threatened to knock out. Number 5. MC Serch. In 2018, MC Serch, the former frontman of Third Bass, sat down with Vlad TV interview platform known for cracking open long-buried stories and casually dropped a bombshell that would shake the foundation of one of hip-hop's most sacred legacies. According to Serch, Def Jam co-founder Lyor Cohen allegedly reached out to him during a critical moment in hip-hop history.
I got a call from Lyor. He was mad.
The request? Help write for Rakim. Yes, Rakim, the God MC. The man whose intricate rhyme patterns, offbeat pocket flows, and deeply introspective bars redefined what it meant to be a rapper. Serch claimed the call came at a time when Rakim was supposedly struggling with writer's block. He said Cohen approached him and asked if he could pen a few verses to help Rakim push through a dry creative spell.
Look, Rakim is he's got a bit of writer's block. I know you're cool with Eric B. Could you write?
For Rakim, this wasn't just some harmless tale from the past. It was an attack, a direct hit on the very essence of his identity as an MC. In 2019, during a press run for his book Sweat the Technique, Rakim appeared on Shade 45. The conversation was going as expected, respectful, insightful, calm, until the interviewer brought up the Serch interview, and suddenly everything shifted. Rakim's energy changed, his tone dropped, and for one of the calmest, most centered voices in hip-hop, he snapped.
My man Serch, but I'll knock my man the f*** out if he's trying to say he wrote something more.
It was raw, it was visceral, and it was one of the only times in his decades-long career that Rakim openly threatened violence. And that alone tells you everything, because Rakim isn't like most rappers. He never played the clout game, he didn't chase headlines, and he didn't entertain drama. His battles were on wax, his energy always measured, always controlled, until now. Why did this hit so hard? Because Rakim's entire legacy is built on one thing: authorship. His rhyme schemes weren't just lines, they were math, science, soul. He brought depth, spirituality, and technical brilliance to an art form that had barely scratched the surface of its own potential. He wasn't just rapping, he was engineering verses. To suggest that someone else, especially a peer like Serch, might have stepped in to write his rhymes, that wasn't just a rumor, that was blasphemy. Ghostwriting has always been a complicated subject in hip-hop. In pop music, it's expected. But in rape, especially among elite lyricists, your pen is your sword. To be accused of needing help is to have your entire catalog called into question. And for someone like Rakim, who helped lay the foundation of modern lyricism, that accusation was a threat to everything he stood for. What made it worse was the timing. Serch brought this up decades later, long after the moment had passed, long after the so-called writer's block, long after the industry had crowned Rakim as a living legend. It wasn't a conversation, it was a landmine dropped in the middle of Rakim's carefully preserved legacy, and it exploded. Insiders say that after Rakim's Shade 45 response, the fallout continued quietly behind the scenes. Eric B., Rakim's longtime partner and fellow pioneer, reportedly stopped speaking to Serch altogether. No public statements, no clarifications, just silence. The kind of silence that carries weight. Serch, for his part, hasn't publicly revisited the story since. And who can blame him? This wasn't just about memory, it was about myth. about the respect an artist earns through decades of integrity. For Rakim, protecting that legacy wasn't optional, it was survival, and anyone who tried to rewrite it, no matter how close they once were, was stepping into dangerous territory. In the end, Serch didn't get knocked out, but his name is now permanently attached to a moment that almost shattered one of the most sacred reputations in hip-hop. And the message from Rakim was crystal clear. Don't ever question the pen that built the temple. And don't play with my name. Not now, not ever. Next is number 4, Nas. Now, this one didn't begin in rivalry, it began in reverence. Nas didn't just admire Rakim, he worshipped him. He once called Rakim the reason I rhyme. From the cadence to the breath control, from the way Rakim broke up bars to how he carved meaning into each pause, Nas studied it all like scripture. He didn't just want to be great, he wanted to write with that same sacred weight Rakim brought to the mic. And for a while, that connection was beautiful. When Illmatic dropped in 1994, it was hailed as the greatest debut in rap history. Fans and critics alike called Nas the second coming of Rakim. The lyrical DNA was obvious. The poetry, the wisdom, the calm. Even the way Nas floated over jazzy production felt like a modern evolution of what Rakim had started with Paid in Full. But sometimes, admiration walks a fine line with overstepping. And for Rakim, that line was crossed in 2004. That's when Nas released a track titled Unauthorized Biography of Rakim. It was meant to be a tribute, a lyrical documentary detailing the life and legacy of his hero. But in trying to paint the full picture, Nas made a mistake, a personal one. He mentioned Rakim's government name. Even worse, he mentioned Rakim's daughter. And that, for the God MC, wasn't just a misstep, it was a violation. Rakim has always been famously private. In an industry driven by chaos and clout, he stood apart by keeping his personal life sealed. No scandals, no outbursts, no overexposure. He let the music speak and guarded his family like sacred ground. So when Unauthorized Biography hit the streets, it didn't land like praise, it landed like a breach. In an interview promoting the 7th Seal, Rakim addressed it calm but clear.
And, I just felt violated almost that he touched on certain things that
There was no diss track, no public takedown, but that's what made it more painful, because it was the kind of hurt that doesn't explode, it lingers. They eventually crossed paths at a Washington, D.C. event, and Rakim, staying true to form, didn't make a scene. He pulled Nas aside quietly and reminded him that some things are better left unsaid, that there's a difference between documenting someone's greatness and digging into things they've chosen to keep private, that even if the intention was love, the delivery left a bruise. And to Nas's credit, listen, in 2007, the two appeared together on DJ Premier's track Classic Better Than I've Ever Been, alongside KRS-One and Kanye West. It was a moment of unity, 4 generations of hip-hop sharing one mic, Rakim and Nas side by side again. But even with the music and the smiles, something in that moment felt unspoken. Because that's the thing about betrayals, especially the unintentional ones. They don't always end in explosions. Sometimes they echo, quietly, for years. Rakim never dissed Nas. He never dragged him in public, but he also never forgot. Because for someone who built his legacy on knowing what not to say on, valuing silence as much as lyricism, having your personal life used as part of someone else's verse cuts deep, Nas meant well. He truly did. But in trying to honor a legend, he forgot what made that legend so powerful in the first place. Restraint, discipline, privacy, and in a way, Unauthorized Biography of Rakim lived up to its title. It was unauthorized. It wasn't asked for, and for Rakim it wasn't okay. They moved on. The moment faded, but the tension never really disappeared. Because sometimes, even a love song can leave a scar. Which brings us to number 3, Big Daddy Kane. In the late 1980s, hip-hop was evolving fast and 2 names towered above the rest, Rakim and Big Daddy Kane. They weren't just rappers. They were blueprints, architects of 2 very different but equally powerful schools of lyricism. Rakim was cool, methodical, cerebral. Kane was charismatic, slick, and theatrical. Together, they represented the East Coast's lyrical elite. And the fans? They wanted war. Both were from New York. Both were hailed as generational talents. And both were constantly compared by hip-hop heads, DJs, and journalists who insisted the genre could only have one lyrical king. It was the kind of pressure that fueled tension, silent, unspoken, but always there. You'd see it in barbershop debates. You'd hear it on the radio. Who had the better flow? Who had the better pen? Rakim or Kane? For years, that tension simmered without ever boiling over. No diss track, no battles, just subtle energy. But that changed, at least behind the scenes, when Rakim recorded Let the Rhythm Hit Him in 1990. During a rare interview with R.A., the rugged man decades later, Rakim confirmed what many fans had long suspected. Yes, there were subliminal shots aimed at Big Daddy Kane in that record. He said, I ain't gonna say the whole song was for Kane, but it was about 3 or 4 bars I put in there for Kane. That may not sound like much, but from Rakim, it was a cannon shot. For someone who rarely engaged in diss culture, a few bars were a statement, and Kane got the message. According to Rakim, it was Eric B's brother, Ant Live, who played the track for Kane, and Kane didn't hesitate. He picked up the phone and called Rakim directly. What happened next was rare in rap beefs. The two actually talked. There was no shouting match, no war of egos, just two grown men, top-tier MCs, having a conversation. Kane respected Rakim too much to let it spiral, and Rakim respected Kane enough to ease off. The bars were removed from the final release, and just like that, the fire was put out before it could catch. But that moment, those few bars tell a deeper story. It confirmed that even if the rivalry was quiet, it was very real. Rakim later admitted that Kane was one of the few MCs who truly kept him on his toes. He said Kane made him write like he had something to prove, and that says everything. They were measuring sticks for each other. And the competition, though never explosive, was sharp, not personal but purposeful. They represented different approaches to mastery. Rakim's pen was spiritual, Kane's was stylish. Rakim was the monk, Kane was the matador. And because of that contrast, the world kept waiting for a showdown. Years later, when the Versus battle series started blowing up during the pandemic, fans saw an opportunity to finally get what they'd been waiting for. Rakim versus Big Daddy Kane, track for track, classic for classic. It felt like destiny. But Kane wasn't interested. When asked, he shut it down gently but firmly, saying, me and him standing on a stage together? Nah.
But me and him standing on a stage together? Nah. I think what people got is what they needed.
He didn't say it out of disrespect. In fact, it was likely the opposite. Kane knew that a battle with Rakim wasn't just a performance, it would have been a heavyweight fight for legacy. And maybe neither of them wanted to put their spotless reputations on the line. To this day, fans still debate what might have happened if that battle had gone down. Could Kane's charisma have outshined Rakim's stillness? Would Rakim's bars have cut through Kane's stage presence? We'll never know. What we got instead was a cold war. No blood, no blows. Just two giants who understood that their legacies were too sacred to risk for applause. And maybe, just maybe, that silence was the loudest respect either one could show. Now we're at number 2, KRS-One. If Big Daddy Kane was Rakim's rival in lyrical technique, KRS-One was his opposite in ideology. They weren't just two MCs battling for rap supremacy, they were two schools of thought, two entirely different visions for what hip-hop should be. And even though they never traded diss tracks or engaged in public warfare, the silent divide between Rakim and KRS-One became one of the most quietly intense rivalries of the golden era. Rakim was the embodiment of control. He was rooted in 5% teachings, his bars dense with spiritual codes, his cadence calm and calculated like a monk in a cipher. He didn't shout, he didn't posture, he rhymed with the stillness of a prophet and the structure of a mathematician. For Rakim, the microphone wasn't just an instrument, it was a sacred tool. Every pause, every line, every rhyme scheme was intentional. Precision was his language. KRS-One, on the other hand, was a storm, loud, militant, unapologetically confrontational. He delivered his bars with urgency, like a street preacher rallying the masses. He saw himself not just as a rapper, but as a movement. He embraced the mic as a weapon, a tool for education, revolution, and power. While Rakim was the inner voice of enlightenment, KRS was the external voice of rebellion. Their differences weren't just stylistic, they were philosophical. What made their divide so fascinating wasn't what was said, but what wasn't. Despite emerging from the same era and rising to prominence at the same time, the two never collaborated. They didn't tour together. They weren't seen in cypher sessions or joint interviews. For decades, their paths ran parallel but never intersected. And for true hip-hop fans, that silence spoke volumes. In an industry where cosigns and features are common currency, the lack of interaction between Rakim and KRS-One was impossible to ignore. Over time, that distance grew heavier with subtle hints of tension. In one interview, Rakim was asked about the loud, performative style many rappers were adopting, and he responded simply, "Shouting doesn't mean you're saying something." It wasn't an obvious jab, but it didn't need to be. Fans instantly connected the dots. The statement felt like a direct contrast to KRS-One's larger-than-life, in-your-face delivery. Years later, KRS made a comment in an interview about how some rappers were more spiritual than political, a comment many saw as a thinly veiled critique of Rakim's abstract, metaphysical approach. Neither ever named the other, but their words lived in the same room. This unspoken friction wasn't about competition for bars. It was about the soul of hip-hop. KRS-One believed that rap had to confront systems, speak truth to power, and organize communities. Rakim believed it should elevate the individual, unlock consciousness, and push lyrical boundaries. KRS was a teacher, Rakim was a philosopher, and they each believed their path was the true one. That divide between microphone as megaphone and microphone as manuscript defined much of the ideological battle within the culture. Over the years, both legends have appeared in the same space panel discussions, retrospectives, and documentaries. Publicly, there's mutual respect. They acknowledge each other's contributions, nodding at each other's genius. But even in those appearances, fans can feel the unspoken boundary. There's a formality to their interaction, a kind of professional politeness that stops short of brotherhood. It's not beef bud, it's not kinship either. In a way, that's what made their dynamic so powerful. Their rivalry didn't need drama to be legendary. It was in the undertones, in the body language, in the complete absence of collaboration. It existed in the way fans debated them, not just as artists, but as ideals. If you were a student of hip-hop, you inevitably found yourself drawn to one approach or the other. You either studied Rakim's codes or followed KRS-One's sermons. Their divide shaped not only how people rapped, but why they rapped. And maybe that's why they never shared the stage. Because in the end, they weren't just two rappers. They were two philosophies in conflict, each powerful, each necessary, and each unwilling to compromise what they stood for. And finally, number 1, Eric B. Of all the names on this list, none cuts deeper than this one. Because this wasn't just a beef, it was a breakup. A split that didn't just end a partnership, but shook the foundation of hip-hop itself. Eric B., Rakim weren't just collaborators, they were innovators. Architects of a new lyrical era. Together, they released 4 groundbreaking albums that forever changed how MCs approached the mic. From Paid in Full to Let the Rhythm Hit 'Em, they elevated hip-hop from party anthems to high art. But behind the brilliance was a silent fracture that would eventually tear them apart. When Rakim was just 17, Eric B. discovered him and brought him into the industry. They came from different worlds. Rakim, the stoic wordsmith grounded in 5%er discipline, and Eric B., the business-minded DJ with deep ties in the streets and the music scene. For a time, that dynamic worked. Rakim focused on the art. Eric handled the business. Together, they built a dynasty. But as the fame grew, so did the friction. By the early 90s, the energy had changed. Behind the scenes, things were unraveling. According to Rakim, the plan they agreed on was supposed to be simple. Eric B. would do a solo album, then Rakim would do his. After that, they'd reunite for one final project that would fulfill their contractual obligations and give them the freedom to renegotiate or move forward independently. Rakim signed off on the deal, but when it came time for Eric to do the same, he refused. That one decision sparked a chain reaction that brought their empire crashing down. Rakim later told NPR, "He felt I was going to cut him out for some reason. That caused the breakup." Whether it was fear, ego, or miscommunication, the trust between them collapsed. And when trust dies in business, especially in the music industry, what follows is almost always ugly. What should have been a graceful transition into solo greatness became a legal quagmire. Their contracts became a battlefield. Rakim was locked into an agreement he couldn't escape, and that kept his voice silent at a time when hip-hop was exploding. While the West Coast was rising and new stars were emerging in the East, Rakim was sidelined, caught in legal purgatory. Nearly 6 years passed before he could finally release his solo debut in 1997 with the 18th Letter. By then, the game had changed. The golden era had evolved, and Rakim's absence was felt by fans who had waited too long for the return of the God MC. Even though they eventually reunited for public appearances and anniversary celebrations, the scars from that split never fully faded. There are smiles on stage, handshakes in front of the cameras, but underneath it all is a history filled with missed opportunities, broken communication, and a dynasty that ended too soon. What they built together was legendary, but what was lost between them is something neither has ever truly repaired. Their story is a reminder that even in a culture defined by loyalty and brotherhood, business can break even the strongest bonds. In the end, Rakim's fallout with Eric B wasn't about a single moment or an explosive argument. It was about slow erosion, the kind that starts with silence and ends with separation. And while both men remain respected in their own right, the sadness of their story lies in what could have been. They weren't just partners, they were pillars. And when one stopped believing in the other, the entire structure crumbled. That's why, out of all the names Rakim might have held resentment for, Eric B stands alone. Not as an enemy in the industry, but as the friend who left a mark no verse could ever erase. Rakim wasn't built for drama, he was built for discipline. His battles weren't in clubs, they were in rhyme books. But when people crossed lines, when rivals, friends, or admirers disrespected his code, he remembered. Some beefs stayed silent, others nearly turned violent, but all of them reveal something deep about who Rakim really is. Not just a rapper, not just a legend, a guardian of the art form. So who do you think crossed the line worst? Drop your take in the comments and stick around, because if this is what Rakim finally admitted at 56, what else has he been holding back?